The autumn afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of Jefferson High School's main courtyard. September leaves drifted across the concrete where clusters of students gathered during their lunch break, their conversations creating a constant buzz of teenage energy and laughter. Near the far corner of the courtyard, away from the main social circles, stood a solitary figure. Arya Kim leaned against the brick wall with a paperback book in her hands, her long black hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. At 17, she had the kind of quiet presence that most people overlooked, not because she was trying to be invisible, but because she seemed completely content in her own space. Arya was new to Jefferson High, having transferred just 2 weeks earlier when her mother took a job at a local assisted living facility. She wore the standard school uniform, a navy blazer over a white shirt, but somehow managed to make even the required clothing look like a deliberate choice rather than an obligation. She read steadily, occasionally turning a page with the same calm attention she brought to everything else. Students passed by in groups, chatting about weekend plans, upcoming tests, and the usual drama of high school social dynamics. None of them paid particular attention to the quiet girl with the book. That changed when Ryan Mitchell and his usual crew approached her corner of the courtyard. Ryan was a senior who had built his reputation on being the kind of person others either feared or tried to impress. At 18, he was tall and athletic, with the confidence that came from never having his authority seriously challenged. His friends followed him partly out of genuine loyalty, and partly because associating with Ryan felt safer than being on his bad side. Well, Ryan announced loudly enough for nearby students to hear. Look what we have here, the mysterious new girl who thinks she's too good to talk to anyone. Arya looked up from her book, but didn't respond. Her expression remained completely neutral, as if Ryan was just another student walking past, rather than someone clearly trying to provoke a reaction. I'm talking to you, Ryan said, stepping closer. Don't you think it's rude to ignore people when they're being friendly? One of Ryan's friends, Josh, laughed nervously. Maybe she doesn't speak English, Ryan. You know how it is with some of these foreign exchange kids. Arya's eyes shifted to Josh for just a moment, taking in his comment with the same calm attention she had been giving her book. Then she returned her gaze to Ryan, still saying nothing. Ryan interpreted her silence as either fear or arrogance, and both possibilities annoyed him equally. He reached out and knocked the book from her hands, sending it tumbling to the concrete. Oops, Ryan said with exaggerated innocence. Butterfingers, maybe you should pick that up. A small crowd was beginning to gather, drawn by the familiar dynamics of a confrontation. Some students looked uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, but none of them moved to intervene. This was Ryan's territory, and everyone knew the unwritten rules about getting involved in his business. Arya looked down at her fallen book, then back up at Ryan. For just a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Not anger or fear, but a kind of assessment. She was measuring something that only she could see. You know what I think? Ryan continued, emboldened by what he interpreted as submission. I think you need to learn some basic social skills, starting with saying thank you when someone gives you attention. He reached out to shove her shoulder, intending to demonstrate his dominance in front of the growing audience of students. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but it would be replayed in the minds of everyone who witnessed it for weeks afterward. Arya moved with fluid precision that seemed almost effortless. Her left hand intercepted Ryan's arm at the wrist while her right hand found a pressure point just above his elbow. Before Ryan could process what was happening, he found himself spun around and gently but irresistibly guided down to his knees on the concrete. Arya held him there for just a moment, long enough for everyone watching to understand that she could have chosen to hurt him, but had decided not to. Then she released him and stepped back, her expression as calm as it had been before the encounter began. Ryan scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and confusion. He looked around at the circle of students who had watched him be handled so easily by the quiet girl he had assumed would be an easy target. The entire courtyard had fallen silent. Even students who hadn't witnessed the actual takedown could sense that something significant had just happened. Arya picked up her book, dusted it off carefully, and returned to reading as if nothing had occurred. She didn't look at Ryan or acknowledge the stares from dozens of her classmates. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds before normal conversation gradually resumed, but with an undercurrent of whispered discussions about what everyone had just seen. Have you ever witnessed an unfair situation like that? And where are you watching this video from? Leave a comment. Who knows? What you write might inspire someone else. Arya Kim had learned the value of silence long before she ever needed to defend herself physically. She lived with her mother, Susan, in a modest two-bedroom apartment across town from Jefferson High. Their life was simple but stable. Susan worked as a certified nursing assistant at Sunrise Manor, and Arya helped with household responsibilities while maintaining excellent grades. The move to this new town hadn't been planned far in advance. Susan had been offered a supervisory position at Sunrise Manor that came with better pay and health benefits than her previous job. For a single mother, the opportunity was too good to pass up, even if it meant disrupting Arya's senior year of high school. Arya had accepted the move with the same quiet pragmatism she brought to most situations. She understood that her mother's career advancement was important for their long-term stability, and she had never been deeply attached to the social aspects of school anyway. What most of her new classmates didn't know was that Arya's reserved nature wasn't shyness or social anxiety. It was a deliberate choice based on experiences that had taught her to be careful about drawing attention to herself. At her previous school, Arya had also been something of an outsider. But there, her quietness had made her a target for students who interpreted her reserve as weakness or arrogance. The bullying had started small: comments about her appearance, exclusion from social groups, occasional pranks that seemed harmless to observers but felt intentionally cruel to Arya. The situation had escalated during her sophomore year when a group of students began following her home from school, making threats and trying to provoke her into reactions they could use to justify more aggressive behavior. Arya had endured months of this treatment without telling her mother, not wanting to create additional stress for someone who was already working 2 jobs to support them. The resolution had come through her grandfather, David Kim, who had visited during spring break and immediately recognized the signs of ongoing harassment in his granddaughter's behavior. David was a quiet man himself, but he had served in the military and later studied traditional Korean martial arts as a way of maintaining discipline and mental clarity. "Arya," he had said during a private conversation, "you don't have to accept treatment that makes you feel unsafe or disrespected, but you also don't have to become someone you're not in order to defend yourself." David had spent the remainder of his visit teaching Arya basic principles of self-defense that emphasized control, precision, and de-escalation over aggression or dominance. The techniques he showed her were designed to neutralize threats quickly and safely, without causing unnecessary harm to attackers. The goal, David had explained, isn't to win fights, it's to end situations where people think they can treat you badly without consequences. More importantly, David had taught Arya to think strategically about conflict. He showed her how to read body language and recognize when situations were likely to escalate. He taught her to project quiet confidence that would discourage most potential aggressors from seeing her as an easy target. Most bullies, David had said, are looking for victims who will either cower or lose control. If you can remain calm and show that you're not afraid, many problems will solve themselves without any physical confrontation. The lessons had proven effective at Arya's previous school. Word had spread quickly that the quiet girl wasn't as helpless as she appeared, and the harassment had stopped abruptly. But Arya had also learned that demonstrating her abilities, even in self-defense, created a different kind of attention that she didn't particularly want. Some students had become afraid of her. Others had tried to befriend her specifically because they thought her skills made her cool or dangerous. A few had tested her abilities by creating situations where she would be pressured to demonstrate what she could do. All of these responses had felt like different versions of the same problem. People treating her as something other than just a normal student who wanted to focus on her education and maintain a few genuine friendships. When Arya started at Jefferson High, she had hoped to simply blend in and complete her senior year without drawing any special attention to herself. She had no interest in being known as the martial arts girl or the one you don't want to mess with. She just wanted to read her books, do well in her classes, and help her mother adjust to their new life. The incident with Ryan Mitchell had been exactly the kind of situation she had hoped to avoid. But when he knocked her book from her hands and tried to push her around in front of a crowd, Arya had made a quick calculation. Allowing him to establish that she could be bullied would create ongoing problems that would be much worse than the temporary attention that came from defending herself. Her grandfather's training had prepared her not just for the physical aspects of the confrontation, but for the aftermath as well. She understood that how she handled the next few days would determine whether this incident became a one-time event or the beginning of a pattern that would define her reputation for the rest of the school year. The key, as David had taught her, was to remain consistent, calm, confident, and completely uninterested in using her abilities for anything other than necessary self-defense. The administration's response to the courtyard incident was swift and predictably bureaucratic. Within an hour of the confrontation, both Arya and Ryan had been called to the principal's office to provide their versions of what had happened. Principal Margaret Torres had been dealing with student conflicts for 15 years, and she approached the situation with the cautious authority of someone who had learned that initial reports rarely told the complete story. She interviewed Ryan first, then Arya, and finally several witnesses who had observed the incident. Ryan's account portrayed himself as the victim of an unprovoked attack. According to his version, he had simply tried to be friendly to the new student, and she had responded with sudden violence that left him humiliated and potentially injured. "I was just trying to welcome her to the school," Ryan told Principal Torres, his voice carrying the wounded tone of someone who felt genuinely wronged. "I might have accidentally bumped her book or something, but that's no reason to assault someone." When it was Arya's turn to speak, she provided a factual description of events without editorializing or defending her actions. She confirmed that Ryan had knocked her book from her hands deliberately, that he had attempted to push her, and that she had responded with the minimum force necessary to prevent him from continuing his aggressive behavior. "Did you intend to hurt Mr. Mitchell?" Principal Torres asked. "No," Arya replied simply. "I intended to stop him from pushing me around." "Have you had training in martial arts or self-defense?" "Some basic instruction from my grandfather." Principal Torres found herself in a familiar dilemma. School policy required consequences for any physical altercation, regardless of who initiated it or whether the response was proportional to the threat. At the same time, multiple witness accounts supported Arya's version of events and suggested that Ryan had been the clear aggressor. The witnesses included Mia Chen, a junior who had been sitting nearby with her lunch and had observed the entire interaction. Mia had never spoken to Arya directly, but she had her own history with Ryan's bullying behavior and felt compelled to provide an accurate account of what she had seen. "Ryan knocked her book down on purpose," Mia told Principal Torres during her interview. "Then he tried to push her, and she just stopped him. She didn't hit him or try to hurt him. She just made it so he couldn't keep being aggressive." Other students provided similar accounts, describing Arya's response as controlled and defensive, rather than retaliatory or excessive. Several mentioned that she had returned to reading immediately after the incident, showing no interest in gloating or escalating the situation further. Principal Torres ultimately decided to issue warnings to both students rather than formal suspensions. Ryan received a more serious warning about harassment and aggressive behavior, while Arya was cautioned about the school's zero-tolerance policy regarding physical confrontations. But the administrative response was only one aspect of how the school community processed what had happened. Among the student body, the incident had created ripple effects that extended far beyond the individuals directly involved. For many students, Arya's calm handling of the situation had been revelation. Ryan Mitchell had built his reputation on intimidating people who couldn't or wouldn't fight back effectively. Seeing him neutralized so easily by someone who appeared completely uninterested in violence or dominance challenged assumptions about power dynamics that had shaped social interactions throughout the school. Some students began approaching conflicts differently, inspired by Arya's example of responding to aggression with controlled confidence rather than escalation or submission. Others started paying attention to bullying behavior they had previously ignored, recognizing patterns they hadn't noticed when they seemed inevitable. But perhaps most significantly, several students who had been targets of bullying themselves began to see Arya as proof that they didn't have to accept mistreatment simply because they weren't physically imposing or socially connected. Mia Chen was among this group. She had endured months of low-level harassment from Ryan and his friends, comments about her appearance, deliberate exclusion from group activities, and occasional pranks that left her feeling isolated and defensive. Watching Arya handle Ryan's aggression with such calm effectiveness had given Mia a new perspective on her own situation. She realized that she had been accepting poor treatment, partly because she believed she had no alternatives. 2 days after the courtyard incident, Mia worked up the courage to approach Arya during lunch. "I wanted to thank you," Mia said quietly, sitting down next to Arya's usual spot against the wall. "Not just for what you did to Ryan, but for how you did it." Arya looked up from her book with a questioning expression. "You didn't try to embarrass him or make him look stupid," Mia continued. "You just stopped him. It made me realize that I don't have to let people treat me badly just because I don't want to cause drama." Arya considered this for a moment, then closed her book and gave Mia her full attention. "Most people who act like Ryan," Arya said quietly, "are testing to see what they can get away with. When you show them that the answer is nothing, they usually move on to easier targets." It was the longest statement anyone at Jefferson High had heard Arya make, and it carried the weight of experience rather than theory. The conversation marked the beginning of an unexpected friendship and the start of changes at Jefferson High that would extend far beyond what anyone could have anticipated from a brief confrontation in the courtyard. The invitation came from Coach Williams, who supervised Jefferson High's self-defense club and had heard detailed accounts of Arya's handling of the Ryan Mitchell situation. 3 days after the courtyard incident, he approached her during the transition between classes. "Arya, I'd like to talk with you about an opportunity that might interest you," Coach Williams said, falling into step beside her as she walked toward her locker. Coach Williams was a former military police officer who had started the self-defense club 5 years earlier in response to concerns about student safety both on and off campus. The club focused on practical techniques for avoiding and de-escalating conflicts, with physical self-defense as a last resort. "Several students have approached me about wanting to learn basic self-defense techniques," Coach Williams continued, "particularly some of the girls who feel vulnerable in certain situations. I was wondering if you might be interested in helping to teach some sessions." Arya stopped walking and turned to face him with a neutral expression. "I appreciate the offer, Coach Williams, but I'm not interested in teaching. May I ask why?" "From what I've heard, you have exactly the kind of practical skills and calm demeanor that would benefit other students." Arya considered her response carefully. The truth was complicated and involved experiences at her previous school that she preferred not to discuss in detail with faculty members she barely knew. "I'm not here to be known as the martial arts girl," she said finally. "I just want to finish high school without being turned into someone's idea of what I should be." Coach Williams sensed there was more to her reluctance than simple modesty. "What if we kept your involvement low-key? No formal announcements or publicity, just occasional assistance with students who specifically ask for help." "I don't think that would work," Arya replied. "Once you're known for something like that, it becomes what people expect from you. I'd rather be known for other things, or, better yet, not known for anything in particular." The conversation reflected a tension that Arya had been grappling with since the incident with Ryan. She understood that her actions had been necessary and appropriate, but she also recognized that they had changed how people perceived her in ways that felt both limiting and potentially problematic. At her previous school, after word had spread about her ability to handle aggressive situations, Arya had found herself dealing with several uncomfortable dynamics. Some students had begun approaching her with requests to intimidate people they were having conflicts with. Others had tested her abilities by creating confrontational situations to see how she would respond. Most problematically, a few students had begun treating her with a kind of fearful respect that made normal social interactions difficult. They acted as if she was someone who might respond to minor annoyances or disagreements with physical force, despite the fact that she had never shown any inclination toward unnecessary aggression. "I understand your concerns," Coach Williams said, "but consider this. There are students in this school who are dealing with bullying situations similar to what you faced with Ryan. Your example has already shown them that they don't have to accept mistreatment. Teaching them practical skills could extend that impact." Arya appreciated Coach Williams' perspective, but she remained unconvinced. Those students need to learn to handle their own situations in ways that work for them. What worked for me might not be appropriate for someone else. What if we focused on de-escalation techniques and situational awareness rather than physical self-defense, Coach Williams suggested. The mental and emotional aspects of handling conflict might be more transferable. Coach Williams, I respect what you're trying to do, but I'm going to decline. If individual students want advice about specific situations, I'm willing to listen, but I don't want to be positioned as an expert or instructor. After their conversation ended, Arya reflected on her decision while walking to her next class. She understood that her refusal might seem selfish or unhelpful to people who saw an opportunity to benefit other students. But she had learned from experience that taking on teaching or mentoring roles often led to expectations and responsibilities that became overwhelming. More importantly, Arya believed that each person needed to develop their own approach to handling conflict and aggression. The techniques her grandfather had taught her worked for her personality and physical capabilities, but they might not be appropriate for students with different temperaments or circumstances. That afternoon, as Arya sat in her usual spot in the courtyard reading, she noticed several students glancing in her direction with expressions that ranged from curiosity to admiration to slight nervousness. The attention made her feel exposed in ways that reminded her of why she had been reluctant to transfer schools in the first place. She had hoped to spend her senior year focusing on academics, college applications, and helping her mother adjust to their new town. Instead, she found herself navigating the social complications that came with being perceived as someone exceptional or potentially dangerous. The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to avoid being bullied, she had created a different kind of social isolation. People were now treating her with respect, but it was the kind of respect that kept them at a distance rather than inviting genuine connection. As she watched groups of students chatting and laughing nearby, Arya wondered if it would be possible to find a middle ground between being invisible and being legendary. The test of Arya's resolve came 2 weeks later, on a gray October afternoon when the autumn air carried the first hint of approaching winter. She had stayed after school to meet with her calculus teacher about an upcoming exam and was walking across the parking lot toward the bus stop when she heard familiar voices raised in distress. Near the far edge of the parking lot, partially hidden behind a row of cars, Mia-chan was surrounded by 3 upperclassmen boys who were clearly enjoying her obvious discomfort. The situation had the casual cruelty of students who knew they could get away with behavior that wouldn't be tolerated in more visible locations. "Come on, Mia," one of them was saying with exaggerated patience. "We're just asking for your help with our history assignment. You're smart, right? That's what all the teachers say." "I already told you I can't help you cheat on Mr. Peterson's test," Mia replied, her voice shaking but determined. "It's not fair to other students." "Fair?" Another boy laughed. "You want to talk about fair? It's not fair that some people get all the advantages while others have to work twice as hard for the same grades." Arya could see that the boys were positioning themselves to prevent Mia from walking away, using their physical presence to create intimidation without technically doing anything that would be clearly defined as assault. It was a sophisticated form of bullying that relied on psychological pressure rather than overt threats. She approached the group quietly, her footsteps making no sound on the asphalt. When she was about 10 feet away, she simply stood and waited for them to notice her presence. The boy who had been speaking turned around and saw her watching them with the same calm attention she had given Ryan Mitchell in the courtyard. His confident expression immediately shifted to uncertainty. "This doesn't concern you," he said, trying to maintain his aggressive posture while clearly recognizing that the situation had changed significantly. Arya didn't respond verbally. Instead, she took 2 steps forward and positioned herself between Mia and the 3 boys, creating a clear path for Mia to leave if she chose to do so. The psychological impact was immediate and powerful. All 3 boys understood that they were now dealing with someone who had demonstrated her ability to handle aggressive behavior without escalation or hesitation. More importantly, they recognized that Arya's intervention wasn't emotional or impulsive. It was a deliberate choice to insert herself into a situation where she had no personal stake other than preventing unfair treatment. "Look," the apparent leader of the group said, taking a step backward, "we weren't doing anything wrong. We were just talking." Arya's expression remained completely neutral, but something in her posture conveyed that she was prepared for whatever might happen next. She wasn't threatening anyone or trying to provoke a confrontation, but she was clearly not going to be intimidated into leaving. The three boys looked at each other, trying to decide whether to continue their harassment of Mia or find an exit strategy that would preserve their dignity. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds before they chose retreat. "Whatever," one of them muttered. "This is stupid anyway." They walked away with the exaggerated casualness of people trying to pretend they hadn't just backed down from a confrontation. Arya watched them until they were well away from both her and Mia, then turned to check on her classmate. Mia was crying, but her tears seemed to be a mixture of relief and gratitude rather than fear or trauma. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I didn't know what to do. They've been following me around for weeks trying to pressure me into helping them cheat." "Are you hurt?" Arya asked, her voice showing more warmth than most students had ever heard from her. "No, just shaken up. They never actually touched me, but they made it clear that they could if they wanted to." Mia wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. "You didn't have to get involved. You could have just kept walking." "Yes, I could have," Arya agreed, "but that would have meant letting them think they could treat you however they wanted." The conversation continued as they walked toward the bus stop together. Mia explained that the harassment had been escalating gradually, with the boys becoming more persistent and more intimidating in their demands for academic assistance. They had chosen their approach carefully, never making explicit threats that could be reported to authorities, but making it clear that Mia's refusal to help them would have social and potentially physical consequences. "I kept hoping they would just lose interest and move on to bothering someone else," Mia said. "But I think they saw me as an easy target because I've never stood up to anyone before." "Standing up to people doesn't always require confrontation," Arya replied. "Sometimes it just means refusing to give them what they want and making it clear that you're not going to change your mind." "But what if they come back? What if they decide to escalate things because I had help?" Arya considered this question carefully. "They won't escalate. People like that are looking for victims who won't cause them any trouble. When they realize that bothering you might create problems for them, they'll find easier targets." The next morning, Arya found a handwritten note taped to her locker. The paper was decorated with small drawings of flowers and stars, and the message was written in Mia's careful handwriting. "Arya, thank you for showing me that silence can be powerful too. You didn't need to say anything to make them understand that what they were doing was wrong. I'm learning that I don't have to be loud or dramatic to stand up for myself. I just have to be firm and consistent, like you. Mia." Below the message, several other students had added their own brief notes of appreciation. "Thanks for making bullies think twice. Jake M. You showed everyone that being strong doesn't mean being mean. Sarah K. My little sister feels safer at school because she knows people like you won't let others get picked on. Marcus T." As Arya read through these messages, she realized that her attempts to avoid attention and maintain a low profile had failed, but perhaps in the best possible way. Instead of being known as the dangerous girl or the martial arts expert, she was becoming known as someone who quietly stood up for people who needed support. The recognition felt different from what she had experienced at her previous school. Rather than being feared or treated as a curiosity, she was being appreciated for her character and her choices rather than just her abilities. What do you think of a girl who doesn't need to say much, doesn't need to stand out, but still earns people's respect? Share your thoughts below and hit subscribe to Hidden Heroine, because strength comes in many forms. 3 months later, Arya had found her place at Jefferson High in a way she had never expected. The self-defense club that she had initially refused to join had evolved into something different, a peer support group that focused on building confidence and communication skills as much as physical techniques. Coach Williams had approached her again after the parking lot incident, but this time with a modified proposal. Rather than asking her to teach martial arts, he wondered if she would be willing to help facilitate discussions about conflict resolution and personal boundaries. "The students who come to our club aren't really looking for fighting techniques," Coach Williams had explained. "They want to learn how to feel more confident in difficult situations. You've shown them that strength can be quiet and that effective responses don't have to be aggressive." Arya had agreed to participate, but only as a peer mentor rather than an instructor. She shared her grandfather's lessons about reading situations, recognizing when conflicts were escalating, and responding with appropriate levels of firmness without losing control of emotions or situations. The club meetings took place twice a week in the school library's community room. Students gathered in a circle to discuss situations they found challenging and to practice communication techniques that might help them handle difficult interactions more effectively. Aria rarely spoke during these sessions unless directly asked for input, but when she did contribute, other students listened with genuine attention. Her quiet confidence had become a model for several of her classmates who were learning that leadership didn't require being the loudest or most dramatic person in the room. Mia had become a regular participant in the club and had developed her own approach to handling pressure and intimidation. The boys who had harassed her in the parking lot had indeed moved on to other targets, just as Aria had predicted, but Mia felt prepared to handle similar situations if they arose in the future. "The most important thing I learned," Mia told the group during one session, "is that I don't have to convince people to leave me alone. I just have to make it clear that I'm not going to give them what they want and then stick to that decision." On this particular afternoon, as the club session concluded and students began gathering their belongings, Coach Williams asked Aria to stay for a few minutes. "I wanted you to know that the administration has been tracking incidents of bullying and harassment since the beginning of the school year," he said. "Reports are down significantly, and when we ask students why, your name comes up frequently." Aria looked puzzled. "My name?" "Students say that knowing you're here makes them feel like they don't have to handle problems alone. They also say that watching how you handle conflicts has taught them to think differently about their own responses to difficult people." As Aria walked home that afternoon, she reflected on how much had changed since her first day at Jefferson High. She still preferred reading to socializing, and she still valued quiet over attention. But she had learned that it was possible to maintain her personal boundaries while still being available to people who needed support. Her mother had noticed the change as well. "You seem more settled here than you were at your old school," Susan had observed recently. "Less guarded somehow." "I think I learned something important," Aria had replied. "I was trying so hard to avoid being seen as different that I was hiding parts of myself that might actually help other people." That evening, as Aria helped her mother prepare dinner in their small kitchen, she thought about her grandfather's lessons and how they had evolved through her own experiences. "Grandpa taught me that martial arts weren't about winning fights," she told her mother, "but I think I understand now that they're also about creating the kind of person that other people feel safe around." The next day, Aria found another note in her locker. This one was from a freshman girl she had never met. "I heard about what you did for Mia and some other students. I just wanted you to know that it makes me feel braver to know that there are people like you at this school. Thank you for showing us that you can be strong without being scary." Aria smiled as she read the note, understanding finally that her grandfather's lessons had prepared her for something much more important than just defending herself. They had taught her how to be the kind of person who made her community stronger and safer for everyone. People will pay attention when you know exactly when to stay silent. In the gentle rhythm of supporting classmates who needed help while maintaining her own authentic personality, Aria had discovered that true strength was about making space for others to find their own courage. If you've ever seen someone who stays quiet but still gives strength to others, tell their story in the comments below. And if you believe that courage doesn't have to be loud, join us at Hidden Heroine.